One of the miracles of cinema is the way that techniques, often technical, can be executed to give the audience something more than information. When you think about it, it's strange that we react so viscerally to the screen. After all, the camera functions just like a human eye. It sees, and it presents what is put in front of it to the spectator on the other side of the lens. So why is it that a particular arrangement of decisions, like the lens a filmmaker uses, the angle a scene is shot from, the rapidity of the edits, affect us in emotionally captivating ways some of the time, but other times leave us disengaged or unactivated? Of course, a lot of credit has to be given to what the camera sees. The performances of the actors, the power of the story or script, all have an enormous impact on how we are affected. But nonetheless, how the camera sees plays a decisive role in our relationship to those materials. A big part of the effectiveness of the way these tools are deployed is the strategic use of objective and subjective perspectives. This can be a confusing concept to filmmakers when they're first introduced to it. In the briefest of definitions, an objective perspective is the use of cinema's visual language just to convey information, as if from an outside point of view, with very little emotional emphasis on any character's perspective. A subjective perspective, instead, tries to convey an emotional impact that grounds the scene in the mental or emotional perspective of a particular character. So what does this mean in practice? Well, it applies to all the creative decisions the filmmaker has at their disposal. The angles you frame the scene from, the millimeter of lenses you use, the use or absence of camera movement, how the scene is cut together, and practically any other choice the filmmaker makes. Every decision could be screened through this test, this question of whether or not you're injecting a subjective perspective or grounding the scene in an objective point of view. Let's use some very basic examples and try to remember that there is an exception for every example given. Look at this scene from the 2015 film Carol.
She's gone?
Early this morning.
Is she coming back?
No.
This is all my fault.
It's nonsense.
Whose perspective is the scene being told from?
We should get going.
The use of the camera, the position, the lenses, the framing are all contributing in subtle and not so subtle ways to an emotional vantage point in the scene. All these tools help ground the scene in Carol's subjective perspective. Look at this scene from 2007's There Will Be Blood. This scene stays rooted in a highly objective perspective. We are observing the action at a distance.
I love you, son. Let's take a look at you.
Notice how the camera remains separate from the headspace of any of the participants in the scene. Observing this confrontation the way we do gives us a unique insight into the emotional state of the characters. It is possible to use this tool in creative ways to create a more dynamic and impactful storytelling. For example, look at this scene from Amours, directed by Maurice Pialat. After a long absence, Suzanne's father has returned. Watch how we begin in an objective perspective. The camera expresses an emotional distance and puts us as the audience in an observational, abstracted place. But then this beat happens. And in this cut, the scene has now radically changed. We are experiencing the emotions of the scene much more vividly, and through the perspective of Suzanne's character. One of the common misconceptions when film students begin learning to think in these terms is to conflate the point of view shot with a subjective perspective. These things are completely different. A point of view shot refers very specifically to the camera seeing literally what the character sees. What is unique about the point of view shot is that while it manages to convey information that can be useful or impactful, it is actually quite alienating on its own, and not quite subjective or objective. When we find ourselves in a point of view shot for a long period of time, we find that we have no real insight into the mental or emotional perspective of the character whose eyes we are supposed to be seeing through. The loss of seeing the emotions of the character on screen through the visual language of the camera and the editing somehow distances us from the experience.
What did you find at the lake?
This is why films that have experimented with remaining completely grounded in a first-person point of view perspective have struggled to escape their appeal as a novelty. Going back to the 1947 film Lady of the Lake, filmmakers have experimented with telling stories from this point of view.
Give me your hands.
Come on, Hardigan. What's holding you back? What's shutting you up? This whole thing stinks to high heaven.
Ultimately, the experience of a film narrative from this vantage point seems to work against the normal voyeuristic position that the audience enjoys in traditional cinema storytelling. The extra intellectual work we must do in order to see through the eyes of a character for a long period of time proves alienating.
Okay, well the good news is that you're going to live a while. The bad news is there's an army standing between you and your wife. So let's go get her.
And while some films like Gaspar Noé's 2009 Enter the Void or 2016's Hardcore Henry have found interesting ways to use this perspective to tell a story in a new or bold way, the films never really managed to provide the audience the same level of emotional engagement with the characters that traditional cinema has sustained. As virtual reality narratives move forward, this will probably be one of the great challenges they face in establishing their own unique language for telling stories. The point of view shot can still be useful for conveying emotions, but primarily where it is used in short intervals and juxtaposed with a good subjective perspective shot. One of the most famous examples is Hitchcock's Vertigo. As Jimmy Stewart pursues Kim Novak, the camera repeatedly cuts between point-of-view shots and more subjective shots. The point-of-view shots function to give you information about what the character would be seeing, and when we rapidly cut back to close-ups and medium shots from a subjective perspective, we connect that information with what our protagonist is feeling. The result of these two things is a powerful emotional connection. Hitchcock's use of point-of-view shot also co-opts us into the scene, making the audience complicit in this act of Stewart stalking Kim Novak's character. 2015 saw the debut of Son of Saul, a film by Hungarian director Laszlo Nemes. Son of Saul is a very bold and experimental use of subjective character perspective to tell an entire film. The unique thing about Son of Saul is that while we never leave a tight close-up or medium shot on our protagonist and never truly see through his point of view, the isolation portrayed in the shots we're shown give us powerful insights into the emotional experience of the unspeakable horror he is living through. These are all pretty radical examples just to illustrate a point, but the truth is that no matter what the scene is, there is a dimension of objective and subjective perspective always at play. It's also important to note that while character perspective is a valid tool and is one way of analyzing how the visual choices are working in any given scene, there are always other ways of looking at these same tools and choices that are available to the filmmaker. Many filmmakers choose to think purely in terms of visually exciting imagery and design their storytelling to facilitate a kind of visual spectacle. Or in the case of some independent films, these visual choices might simply be necessitated by the circumstances of the production. Many of the excellent low-budget narrative cinema of filmmakers like Andrew Bujalski, Joe Swanberg, and Mark Duplass focused totally on the mostly improvised performances of their friends. The camera work and visual language is there only to facilitate the performance and does little to create a sense of perspective on the part of the characters in the scene. The point I'm trying to make is that these choices are just as valid as working with shot design as a tool to communicate emotional perspective. What is fascinating is each filmmaker in each film establish their own rules for how visual language should work on the audience member. You can think of a film as an interior dialect within the larger language of film grammar. The role of the filmmakers is to determine how those rules will work and how they will interact with the story they're trying to tell. In the case of an Ozu movie, the visual language will always obey strict rules. The camera will refuse to move. It will remain close to the ground. Frames will always seek balance and harmony. A 50mm lens will often be employed. We might call these frames objective and observational, but the impact of the moments where Ozu breaks his own rules and does move his camera are all the more intensely felt because of the austerity to which he's built his cinema on. If your goal is to reach your audience on an emotional level, you have to think carefully about the tools you have at your disposal.
Hit me. Hit me. Come on, son. Hit. Give me some. Show me what you got.
And what those tools do beyond creating a frame. These choices have a psychology to them. And when combined together in unique ways, they have an impact that rises above their individual merit.
Here I go again. I hear those trumpets blow again. All aglow again. Taking a chance on love. Here I slide again, about to take that ride again. Starry-eyed again, taking a chance